T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Seraphim Space live webinar. Today, we'll be diving into the latest trends and insights from our Q3 2025 index report. And today, I'm joined by Jeff, one of our analysts here at Seraphim. Hello, Jeff.
Oh, yeah, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And this is Jeff's first time joining us on the live, so I'm really excited to get his perspective on what appears to be some very impressive data this Q.
Let's do it.
So as usual, if you have any questions for Jeff as we go through the Q&A, please post them in the chat and we can answer them either at the end of the conversation, or if we don't get time, we can do it in the post live. So let's get straight to the questions. Jeff, some really impressive finding from the report this year. It was recorded that as 3.5 billion in SpaceTech investment. That's incredibly impressive data. What do you think, what have you seen as the main drivers, in your opinion, behind this growth compared to last Q?
Yeah, you know what? I think the past couple of years has been kind of crazy for SpaceTech. Just a reminder, so in 2024, actually, I think we hit like the new record for total number of deals done, around 600. And as you mentioned, this quarter was the highest invested capital quarter yet. And I should also mention, if you look at the numbers, in 2024, we got 8.6 billion of total capital invested into space. And with this quarter included, we're already at 8.7. So I think the year is going to end on like a really nice high. So I wanted to kind of remind the audience of the numbers. In terms of the drivers of growth, I would say probably the biggest driver is everything that's going on with defense. So you hear about, the war in Ukraine, dynamics between US and China, the US talk about like Golden Dome, for example. I think those are all are all like key players that are kind of driving this interest in defense. And of course, space is a huge component of defense. So it's not surprising that with all that's been going on, governments are increasing their demand as well as their spend for space, all things related to space. I think another example would probably be the EU, for example. They've increased a lot of their budget, primarily focused on getting more sovereignty and reducing their dependence on external powers like the US mainly. And I think in our index, we kind of wrote about Germany, for example, kind of leading this charge. I think they've pledged 35 billion euros to invest in space-related defense projects by 2030. NATO allies as well, they've pledged 5% of their GDP on core defense requirements, which again, space is a huge part of. So I think defense is probably the number one driver. And then I guess, honestly, the other drivers probably would be just general investor sentiment. It's a pretty in-demand sector, I would say, space. So there's a lot of appetite for private and public investors to kind of pour money into the space. So I think those would probably be the key drivers for the sector.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we're just also seeing so much real demonstration of commercial viability with a lot of the big players. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah, there were so many announcements this year all over Europe, especially in Germany, around these huge defense potential spendings coming up. So that's really impacted so many of these companies. Thanks for that, Jeff. Another thing you reported was historically funding was concentrated in kind of larger players, for example, the OneWeb, SpaceX is, for example, but now you're seeing that it really spread across lots of smaller companies and a wider range of different types of companies. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I think it's probably good news that we are seeing more investment kind of spread across different companies and not being concentrated. I think more players probably means greater competition, probably more innovation, leading to maybe more well-rounded space startups and companies. It's probably really great for the customers as well. So with more players, you get, I guess, better prices, you get more choices and greater efficiency for customers. I think for an investor perspective, I think what I'm seeing and what I like is that the investors now are kind of pouring money into maybe the up-and-comers and not just like the big name players. So again, like greater risk appetite, which is good to see. I should probably also mention, because we're like one of the first SpaceTech VC funds, I think historically we used to worry like, oh, SpaceX and OneWeb in Europe, they've kind of taken up all the investments and all the contracts that the government has. So it's good to see that that's not necessarily the case. And I think we used to say like, oh, space is booming back in the day, but that kind of meant SpaceX was really booming. But now we can actually say space is booming, which is always good to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're just seeing these smaller companies be able to be more agile with their contracts, being able to, I think, and that's obviously helping them grow and get more funding. People are just more confident in these companies and don't just have to rely on kind of investing in companies like the SpaceXs and the OneWeb. So it's really exciting and definitely shows a sign of a maturing market, which you've reported. And something that's really spread out rather than just relying on a handful of big ticket deals. It's great to see it more broad.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you think SpaceTech compares to other sectors? I mean, we love to say that, personally for here at Seraphim, that the SpaceTech will be eventually bigger than AI. What's your opinion on that?
I guess there's I think there's similarities and differences between SpaceTech and AI. I think for both these sectors nowadays, it's pretty it's an in-demand sector, so there's a lot of investors kind of jumping in. To be honest, I think a lot of the investors aren't necessarily deep tech or space tech VCs. So it's interesting to see like a hardware startup that we've looked at that we've passed on because it's not like physically feasible, but they're getting investment. So I think there's a lot of hype surrounding these sectors. I think both markets have maybe more developed areas within their tech and their use case. So in space, obviously, like Earth observation, satellite communications is more mature, I would say, as opposed to, I don't know, in space economy. Whereas for AI, natural language processing is a bit more developed compared to, I don't know, physical automation like robotics. I think from an investment point of view as well, I would say it seems like investors are looking more at companies that are offering like a picks and shovels approach. So in AI specifically, you have like the NVIDIAs of the world manufacturing GPUs that are getting a lot of funding in space as well, like materials and components that are also attracting a lot of investment opportunities. But obviously, AI is this huge market. I think in 2024 it accounted for like a third of capital raised, whereas space tech is obviously like a much smaller part of that. So I think there is opportunity for space tech, probably not to be as big as AI, but kind of to continue growing. I think there are some challenges with space tech in the sense that it's a very much more B2G focused industry. So a lot of times you're selling to governments, you're developing hardware, which means long procurement cycles with customers as well as long development cycles, which isn't necessarily the case with AI. Although that being said, like you do get more consistent revenue because you have the government as your kind of anchor customer, so you're getting a bit more reliable revenue through these contracts that are, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years long. And so I think you need to be like a very patient investor if you want to be in space. I think last thing I would say is like if you just I guess anecdotally, if you look at our share price, it's been like increasing for some time, and I think that just is evidence of investors wanting kind of exposure to space and wanting access to like our portfolio of space companies. So yeah, I think it's like and the data also shows like it's growing in terms of number of deals and also total capital invested. So yeah, I think it's growing. Obviously not as big as AI, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as Jeff says, our share price has been growing dramatically, like the last few months. And yeah, but obviously through our investment trust, we give people access to companies that they wouldn't be able to invest in normally. I think, but also, for example, like other investors, like private, more VCs, private investors. The way I see it is it's if you put space in the middle, it's some sort of like Venn diagram between like defense and AI. So if you invest in space, you kind of get access to all of these markets through these companies that we have on offer. So yeah, it's super interesting. We're kind of like in the middle of it all. Space kind of encompasses all of that. So yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's a really great insights again from you. Let's go to talk about geography.
Okay.
Within the index, we saw, I think it was the biggest round this quarter by Galactic Energy, who is a Chinese company. It was you reported 336 million.
Yep.
And is this right? It's a government-backed initiative. Is that correct?
No, so that one is more commercial.
Oh, that's more commercial. Okay, sorry. So how does China, how is that differing from the US and Europe? What impact does this have on global markets?
Yeah, but I don't think you're wrong to think that it's government backed. I think if you look at historic data, historically, the Chinese space economy has been essentially backed by the government. I think since up until 2014, I think 100% of all space activity was done by like state-owned companies. I think they've since kind of opened that up a bit more, just because of the space race between China and the U.S., which is why you're seeing these Chinese companies getting a lot of funding. But no, China is different from the U.S. and Europe, I would say, in the sense that they obviously they invest more long term in their companies. I think China has a bit more of a long term vision. They understand what the long term capabilities should be, and so they're investing more money for a longer term into these type of companies. Ultimately, right, they want to be the dominant figure in space, and so they're putting money towards these initiatives. I think I would also add, so I think there's been a report as well, if we're talking about the U.S. and China, where it's like a timeline of milestones that China wants to achieve, and I think by the time China wants to put people on the lunar surface, the U.S. is only kind of figuring out how to return from the moon. So they definitely are very much supporting the space economy in China. The U.S. is a bit different. So I think the U.S., the government provides more contracts rather than investment. So for the early stage companies in the U.S., to help them, I guess, get their tech ready for commercialization, I think the U.S. government expects the private market to be the ones that are actually funding and supporting these companies. And then I guess a quick note on the EU. I think we're just doing like a big sovereignty play, I would say, just to kind of replace all the things that we're kind of relying on the US for, to kind of, I guess, plug those holes in our ecosystem. So I think those would be the difference. I think what it means for the global market, I would say there's obviously going to be that continued race between the US and China. But I'm actually just excited because of the amount of dollars that are being put towards space and defense. There's probably going to be a lot more investment opportunities, especially in like EU and the US, for investment.
Yeah, definitely. I think we reported in our defense white paper that we released in January that I think, the amount of satellites that the US and, China had put into space compared to Europe was absolutely worrying. Yeah. And so, that's exactly right. I think they're kind of playing catch up there on that. So would you say that basically from the perspective of mainly investing in kind of hardware solutions, that China is where the US was maybe 4 or 5 years ago?
I think the
because they're making these kind of less deals but more high value now kind of.
I think the US probably still has like a slight lead, but the US is the US has a slight lead, but China is definitely catching up.
Cool, thank you. Sorry, I was just reading a message there. We've actually got a question. I don't know if we want to talk about it now or wait till the end. What's your opinion on this, the AI bubble bursting?
Yeah, okay, so I think the AI market is definitely frothy. So we're seeing a lot of like companies, not even like pure space companies, but just AI they have nothing, but they're getting like $30-40 million valuations. So there are a lot of these very much overvalued opportunities. You also see that in the public markets as well. So there's a lot of talk about like QQQ indexes, for example, that's kind of measuring technology. A lot of companies, investors are kind of shorting these indices because they think they're kind of overvalued. I personally also agree that there's probably going to be a pullback in the future. I don't know, obviously, when, but it does seem like that. I think it's also pretty similar in SpaceTech as well, right? So as I mentioned, a lot of these external investors are coming in. They might not necessarily understand the technology, even if it's like infeasible. They'll give you money if you have nothing. So I think it's following like a similar path, SpaceTech.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I would say a lot of I think a lot of VC specifically are chasing maybe the same deals. Um, I personally believe that there are still opportunities in the market that are probably not being seen. Um, Founders with real like credibility raising at like pretty reasonable valuations. Um, but I guess it's our job to kind of find
Yeah.
those.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
see kind of, I think, Seraphim, we report, you see, you guys see like over 75% of all global deal flow. So
Yeah.
you got to,
Yeah.
there's someone there.
There's
But
someone there.
there's someone there, yeah. I mean, also, just to finish off on, thank you, Catherine, for that question. What I was actually discussing with someone earlier that, this, we're not calling it a defense bubble, that what's happening with the defense investing at the moment, but this allows kind of a lot of our companies, for example, ISI, they're getting these huge kind of government contracts right now, but this will, and now they will, when, obviously when the conflict in the Ukraine is over, they will be able to go back to their commercial roots, right? And they'll be able to go back to their original missions. There's still so much to be done in the way of climate sustainability.
Yeah.
And that's not their only work, that they do. So whether this bubble ends, there's always going to be a use case for these companies.
Yeah.
So let's talk about public companies. For example, companies like Planet Labs, Rocket Lab, AST, for example. What's your opinion about the public markets at the moment?
Well, I think the public markets have been very kind to space companies. I think there's been actually 3 IPOs this year, right? Carmen earlier this year, we had Voyager, and then this quarter we had Firefly, and they've all kind of debuted above their initial listing price. So it seems like the public market has appetite for SpaceTech. The company's already listed. They are doing quite well. I think we reported like Rocket Labs, AST. They've kind of had a great share run this quarter. I think the difference now in the markets is investors are looking not just for like, I don't know, a cool story, right? They kind of want the actual fundamentals, and we see that. So Rocket Lab, for example, they recorded record revenues in Q2. They haven't released their Q3 numbers yet. Same thing with Planet Labs. Both those companies are also seeing like huge demand in what they're offering. AST, for example, they announced their partnership with Verizon, set to start in 2026 to provide direct-to-device services, and that's kind of allowed that company to also do a lovely share run. And also in the D2D space, I should probably mention SpaceX with Starlink. They acquired EchoStar in this quarter. Acquired EchoStar Spectrum, not EchoStar. So they're kind of developing their own D2D capabilities. So I think a lot of investors are seeing huge opportunities for huge revenues in this space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is the IPO market back open for business?
I don't know if it's like wide open, but there's definitely like cracks opening. And I'm super excited to see what companies kind of go public in Q4 as well as next year.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's looking great.
Yeah, definitely great. Yeah, exactly. Exciting times ahead. If anyone's got any more questions for Jeff, please keep them coming. But we'll carry on. Which segments, Jeff, in your opinion, of the space tech market, would you think will drive? We've obviously discussed defense quite heavily, but you can touch on that again. But is there anything else that you think will drive growth?
Yeah. Okay. So when you asked that question, my first thought was defense. So I think like defense and dual use companies are probably going to be, in the short term, I guess, what's driving growth in the markets. Probably satellite networks, maybe like direct to device. There's a lot of
Yeah.
opportunity and activity in that space. So I think those two would probably be my answers.
Yeah. What are you interested in that's kind of currently under the radar, but then maybe, you think it's going to be big in the future?
Okay, so this is gonna sound crazy, but I'm a real big fan of life science and space. So obviously the economy is not there yet, and the technology is kind of developing. But I think there's huge opportunity, especially in the microgravity environment, for companies to do drug discovery, drug development. Um, we've looked at a lot of companies that are kind of experimenting currently, and the results that they're getting in space, like it can't be replicated on Earth. So I think that's going to have huge impacts on human health and kind of improving the lives of people, which is obviously like something we're super passionate about.
Yeah, it's proper science fiction turning into science fact stuff.
Yeah.
No, I love that too. Yeah, there's so many awesome companies. Yeah, that's really exciting. With dual use technology, as we've mentioned, it's on the tip of everyone's tongue, on the tip of everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
Can you give examples of any companies, not just in our portfolio, kind of
Yeah.
globally, that are really benefiting from this current capability?
Yeah, so maybe I'll drop one company from our portfolio, and then I can talk about a company that's not within
Definitely.
our portfolio. So I think ISI is a company that's really benefiting from
Sure.
this increase in demand for defense capabilities. I think they're working with a lot of national defense forces to provide insights. So yeah, that's a little, I guess, plug on our portfolio company. But I think in terms of outside of our portfolio, there's a lot of companies in the US like Hadrian maybe or Hermes that are kind of providing a lot of capabilities for the US government that I think are doing well as well. Yeah, I think those would be what I would say.
Yeah, there's a large percentage of our portfolio that are classed as
Yeah.
dual use, right?
And to be honest, like the companies that are coming across our desk, right? So we've looked at the company maybe a year ago, and they were really focused on the commercial market, and then they've come back to us with this new deck, and it's just defense focused. So it's really interesting to see these companies kind of integrate themselves with the defense market. But I think that also just talks to the fact that a lot of space tech is super aligned with
Yeah.
defense.
But are you seeing companies that are kind of like, you think, this is loose, or are you
No, like it can totally be used in the defense market. I think when they show their market size slide, defense is maybe
Yeah,
secondary, but now it's like the big market.
makes sense. Yeah. Jeff, thank you for that. Finally, for any kind of investors or stakeholders watching, what would you say are your key takeaways, from the report, and how
Yeah.
can people, because as we said, like there's so many new kind of investors looking to get into SpaceTech. So this report is
Yeah.
crucial for these kind of investors. Like what should they pull out? What should they be looking at?
I would say in the short term, again, defense is probably going to be the biggest driver of the market. It's growing. I think probably if you're looking at hard tech, it's probably beneficial for you to kind of do a bit more technical diligence because a lot of the times it's probably not technically feasible. So don't invest in something that probably won't exist. And I think the last thing I would say is I think the go-to-market for a lot of these companies is going to be interesting. So you have governments right now saying they have a lot of money, but the procurement process is slow to say the least. And if you're not from the right country, right, you might get locked out as well of these opportunities. So I would probably say look for companies that can successfully navigate these challenges, and you might find a winner.
And life sciences, maybe.
Yes, sorry, yes, and look at science.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for you so much for your insights today. And for everyone watching, we hope this discussion gave you a picture of the incredible movement we've had like in the industry over the last, you can view the last quarter, but you can also view, we've been doing it now for a couple of years now, so you can really see the growth in the industry. But keep an eye out for the next index, and also keep an eye on our socials. We got the news coming out of our portfolio is absolutely huge, and it's a super exciting place to be. And if anyone's got any other questions for Jeff, please post them on our LinkedIn, and Jeff will happily come in and answer them post live. But thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks to Jeff.
Thank you.